Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. The presentation's entitled Accelerating Cash Flow, Construction Billing Best Practices in Sage Intacct Construction. I'm Brian Terrell, and I am the managing partner of the B. Terrell Group and Legible. Legible's a B. Terrell company, and our goal today is to help you understand Sage Intacct Construction's billing capabilities, how it helps automate billing, improve accuracy, manage retainage and change orders, accelerate payment cycles, and reduce reliance on manual spreadsheets. This session is brought to you by Legible, once again, a B. Terrell company, and we are in our 35th year of upgrading small and mid-sized businesses from QuickBooks or a legacy on-premises construction financial application to Sage Intacct Construction. Sage Intacct Construction is the only accounting application ever named by the AICPA as their preferred provider of financial applications. Today I'm joined by Chris Fira and Lavender Yu. Both have many years of experience and expertise with Sage Intacct Construction. But before Chris and Lavender get started, let me cover a few brief and quick housekeeping items. Today's presentation qualifies for an hour of CPE credit, and to enable that, the Texas State Board of Public Accountancy requires we verify attendance during the presentation as well as survey our attendees after the presentation. And so we're going to ask for your cooperation on those two items. The first one's very simple. We will pop up a question from time to time, and we'll give you an example of that here in a moment. But then we'll also send those post-webinar evaluation forms, and I think they'll be sent out promptly, maybe as soon as tomorrow. As a B. Terrell company, Legible is able to award CPE as long as we comply with requirements placed on us by our Texas State Board of Public Accountancy. Now, I offered to show you what those polling questions look like. The slide will look like the next slide that pops up on your screen. But in addition to that, you'll see the pop-up that Zoom places on your desktop. And this will happen 3, maybe 4 times throughout the presentation. This is how we verify attendance by your response. It's not about being right or wrong. However, this particular question, we really hope you'll answer correctly, because it sets our expectation as to who in today's audience will be expecting that CPE credit. Once again, our goal is just to get you to answer those questions in 20 seconds or less, which will allow us to move on to the great content that I know Chris and Lavender have prepared. And before we get to that, just a couple of more housekeeping items. We've disabled the audio and actually the video as well for all attendees to minimize distractions. But that doesn't uh, we don't want you to think that we don't encourage your questions. And to submit a question for Lavender and Chris to answer, just click on the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar, and we'll make a note of that and follow up with them at the end of the presentation to have that answered. And then one final point. We're recording today's presentation, and we'll send you a link to that recording within 5 business days. We hope you'll use that to review the highlights of today's webinar. We hope you'll use that to share with colleagues in your office who were unable to join us today. And we hope you'll use that to share with your peers in the industry or at CFMA or wherever you're out and about, to share this great information with them. So that wraps up our housekeeping items for today. And without any further delay, I'm going to ask Lavender to start with today's webinar. Lavender?
Okay, thank you, Brent, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we get into the details, just think about your current billing process for a moment. For many teams, information is still spread out. Contracts might be in one place, change orders somewhere else, and things like billing schedules or retainage are sometimes tracked manually. And when that happens, you start to see issues. A milestone might be completed, but billing doesn't go out right away. Or a change order gets approved, but it doesn't show up in the next invoice. Or retainage has to be calculated separately, which can get confusing later on. So when we think about what a better billing process should look like, it really comes down to 4 areas. First, contract-based billing automation. Billing shouldn't depend on someone remembering when it to be invoiced. It should follow a structure defined in the contract. Second, change order and retainage management. Once a change order is approved, it should immediately update the contract and be reflected in the billing, not tracked separately. And third, real-time WIP and profit visibility. You want to understand how the project is performing while it's still in progress, not wait until the end of the month. And finally, automated progress billing. Billing should reflect actual project progress, whether that's based on the milestones or percentage complete, and it should be consistent from one billing cycle to the next. So, as we go through today's session, there are 4 areas we will keep coming back to. So, building on those 4 areas, the next thing that really drives how billing works is a contract type. In Sage Intacct construction, there are 2 primary contract types: fixed fee contracts and time and materials contracts.
Hey, Lavender, I'm curious. How do I know when to use fixed fee versus time and materials?
That's a great question. It really comes down to how the project is structured. With fixed fee, the total contract value is defined upfront, and billing is based on milestones or project progress. Whereas with time and materials, billing is driven by actual costs, things like labor, materials, and markups. And these two behave very differently. With fixed fee, the focus is really on timing and structure of billing, since your revenue is fixed. With time and materials, it's more about capturing all billable costs accurately.
That's helpful. So fixed fee is more about managing progress against a defined contract, while time and materials is really tracking and billing what actually happens on the job.
Exactly. So for today, we will start with fixed fee, and then we will come back to time and materials later. So as we mentioned earlier, fixed fee contracts are based on a defined contract value, and billing is typically tied to milestones or project progress. So the key here is really having a structured way to manage that, making sure billing happens at the right time and stays aligned with the contract. And this is where the system comes in. So next, let's take a look at some of the key features that support this in Sage Intacct. Let's start with the first one, change order management. In construction, this is something that happens all the time. Scope changes, client requests, adjustment during the project. And every change has an impact. It doesn't just affect billing, it also affects your contract value, your estimates, and how you track the project overall.
Hey, Lavender, I have another quick question. If a change order impacts all of those areas, how do you make sure everything stays in sync?
Yeah, that's really where things can get tricky, because in a lot of cases, this is exactly where things start to break down. A change order may get approved, but it's not reflected in a contract right away, or it's tracked outside the system, and doesn't make it into billing on time. So in Sage Intacct, change order management is built directly into the contract. Everything is tied back to the original contract, so you always have a clear view of how contract has changed over time. Once the change order is approved, the system updates the contract value immediately, and you can see that in the example here. We're working within a specific project contract, and at the contract line level, for example, project management, we have added a change order amount, say $1,500. Once that is approved, that amount is automatically reflected on the contract line, updating the total revised price. And just as important, this doesn't only affect the contract, you will also see fields like cost code and cost type. That means the same change order can also update your estimates. So your estimates stay aligned with the update scope. And finally, everything can go through an approval workflow. So you can see what was changed, who approved it, and when. So instead of managing change orders separately, everything stays connected: contract, estimates, and billing.
That's really helpful. So everything is updated together instead of being tracked in different places.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's really where you start to see the value of having everything connected in the system. All right, another key feature in Sage Intacct is compliant revenue recognition. And one important concept here is that billing and revenue recognition are handled separately. Let me show you how that looks in the system. First, looking at the project contract lines. This is where your revenue is defined. In this example, you can see there are multiple contract lines. For example, the first line ID 001. Originally, this line may have been set as at $10,000. And from the change order we just discussed, we added an additional $1,500. So now the total revised price for this line becomes $11,500. This represents the total revenue for the specific part of the project. But again, that doesn't mean all of that revenue has been earned yet. Now, if we switch over to the general invoice screen, this is where billing is actually driven. Here, you will see fields like percentage completed to date and completed this period. So, depending on how the project is structured, the user can decide how to bill. If billing is based on amount completed, they can enter how much a project has been completed to date. For example, looking at the lines here, project management may be billed at $5,000, fabric at $10,000, painting at $3,000, and so on. So for each contract line, you are entering the amount completed for that specific period. And then the system automatically rolls that up. So when you total everything together, you may end up with a billing amount, for example, $18,000 for this period. And based on those inputs, the system calculates how much should be billed for that cycle. So this is really where you see the difference. The contract defines the total revenue, but billing is driven by project progress or activity. And by separating the two, the systems give you much better control and visibility over both. Another key feature in Sage Intacct is how it handles budget. In the system, you can see actually create multiple budgets, depending on what you want to track. For example, you may create one budget for your project contract and another budget for your project estimate. So, even though they are both budgets, they are used for different purposes. One is used to track your contract structure and revenue expectations, and the other is used to track your estimated costs. Once those budgets are created, they can be associated directly within the system. So, when you create a project contract, you can link it to a specific budget. And from there, as billing and revenue activities happen, the system will post those amounts against that contract budget. So you can compare your actual revenue performance against what was originally planned in the contract budget. The same applies on the estimate side. When you set up your project estimate, you can link it to a budget as well. And as actual costs come in, those costs are tracked against that estimate budget. So, depending on what you want to analyze, you can compare actual cost to your estimate budget or actual revenue to your contract budget. And the key point here is that all of this is updated in real time. As long as your project contract and your project estimate are tied to budgets, the system continuously updates those balances. So you always have an up-to-date view of performance. So it's not just about setting a budget, it's about using it as a benchmark to track how the project is actually performing. Okay, another important area in construction billing is retainage. A portion of each invoice is typically held back. For example, 5% or 10%, and needs to be tracked over the life of the project. In many cases, this is still managed manually, which makes it difficult to know how much is outstanding or when to release it. In Sage Intacct, retainage is handled automatically as part of billing. The system calculates retainage based on the contract setup, tracks it throughout the project, and allows you to release it through a separate billing when needed. And this helps you maximum recovery of withheld funds, streamline contract closeout, and ultimately reduce payment disputes and improve cash flow. So finally, let's look at AIA billing. One of the key capabilities in Sage Intacct construction is that it can automatically generate standard AIA billing forms, including both G702 and G703. So instead of preparing those manually, the system generates them directly based on your contract, billing, and change order data. On the right, what we're looking at here is a G702 example. In the first line, you can see the original contract amount. Then you have the net change by change orders, which reflects the approved change orders we discussed earlier. When you combine those, you get the contract sum to date, which is your revised contract value. Then you will see the total completed and stored to date. In this case, that ties back to the $18,000 we talked through earlier in the billing. And below that, you also see retainage, which is being calculated automatically, for example, at 10% based on the contract setup. And further down in the table, you will see items like approved this month, which reflects the current period change activities, such as the $1,500 change order we mentioned earlier. And this is how everything we just discussed comes together in the AIA format.
Lavender, what are some best practices for managing fixed fee contracts?
Great question. Let's take a moment to recap some key best practices when managing fixed fee contracts. First, it's important to maintain strict control over the contract value. In a fixed fee model, that number shouldn't change unless it goes through a formal change management process. Second, since revenue is fixed, protecting your margin really comes down to how well you manage costs. So, having clear, real-time visibility into cost performance is critical. And finally, billing should stay disciplined, aligned with both contract limits and the actual progress of the contract. So you're staying compliant while also keeping cash flow on track. Now, time for one more quick poll. Based on what we have covered in previous slides, here is a question. In a fixed fee contract, what is the primary driver of how much is billed an application for payment? You can go ahead and take a second to read through the options and submit your answer. To ease your nerves, you don't have to get it right, but please answer it for your CPE credit if needed. And once again, please fill out the evaluation form we have sent by email in the next day or two. Alright, you should be ready for the answer. The correct answer is the percentage of completion for each item in the schedule of values. In a fixed fee contract, billing is not driven by cost, so it's not based on the total cost incurred or changes in the estimated cost. It's also not driven by retainage. Instead, billing is based on how much the work has been completed, typically at the contract line level. So that's why the percentage of completion is a primary driver. So that's all for the fixed fee I want to talk through. Next, I will hand over to Chris to walk you through the time and materials contract.
Thanks, Lavender. Now let's switch from discussing progress-based billing to cost-based billing, where the biggest risk is not incomplete progress tracking, but incomplete cost capture. While not as predominant as fixed fee, time and materials or T&M contracts are at least a part of most contractors' engagements. In construction, time and materials contracts are often classified as either of two types: standard T&M, which are open-ended in terms of billing, and capped contracts, which are usually referred to as guaranteed maximum price, or GMP, because a GMP, or a not-to-exceed clause, has been added to the agreement. These clauses cap the total amount billed by the contractor to the owner or customer under the scope of the original contract. Let's start with standard T&M contracts, or those without GMP. Most construction firms report encountering these types of contracts. However, it's clear that standard T&M is used in a small minority of construction contracts. Open-ended T&M contracts are commonly used in certain conditions, such as projects that are smaller in scope or contracted for expediency. Think emergency repairs when time is not available or allowed for complete scoping and estimating. And in those projects that are difficult to estimate due to the number of unknowns, like with historical renovations. We also sometimes see standard T&M used for late owner-specified change orders to larger projects. These contracts are usually the most favorable to a contractor from a risk perspective because cost coverage is ensured by the contract. So what does a standard T&M contract look like, and what does it contain? Usually the contractor bills for project costs plus a markup for overhead and profit. Overhead and profit are sometimes billed as separate line items, but they can also be built into each cost category or item in the contract's schedule of work. Labor is often billed at agreed upon fully burdened rates for each trade or category, which are designated in the contract. The trade-off to the lower risk to the contractor is that owners or customers want more detailed invoice approval workflows, stricter documentation requirements, including receiving copies of invoices, receipts, timesheets, etc., that substantiate costs, and sometimes the right to later audit the records of the contractor. Also, they often want to be able to pre-approve major costs before incurring them. One of the biggest problems or headaches for contractors with time and materials projects is the failure to identify and bill for costs in a timely basis. When unbilled costs are discovered after the normal billing cycle, it can cause embarrassment to the contractor and a loss of customers' confidence. In the worst case, untracked costs may never be reimbursed, damaging the project's profit margin. Another related challenge is simply the additional effort of keeping track of and transmitting supporting cost documentation that usually accompanies customer billing. One construction firm told us that they spent over 200 hours each month scanning documents, updating tracking spreadsheets, reconciling billing, and then compiling merged documents for transmittal to the customer. When customers are forced to request missing documentation, the contractor has to scramble to locate and then send them on. When systems don't automate these processes, these tasks are often managed in spreadsheets and shared folders, and they require dozens of manual error-prone steps. And these manual efforts slow down billing cycles, and more importantly, cash flow. Sage Intacct Construction provides the structures and automation tools to easily manage time and materials contracts. If fixed fee depends on contract progress, T&M depends on cost capture discipline. So before you can bill accurately, you need the contract, billing rates, and billable transactions all working together. This starts with setting up a project and a linked project contract. The project contract defines the presentation of each pay application invoice, including the contract lines that are presented in detail or in summary. It also configures the rules that automate billing for labor at contracted rates and billing for subcontracts, materials, equipment, and other costs at specified markups. A Sage Intacct project contract is set up with one or more contract lines that provide the schedule of work and the structure of the invoice details. When setting up a time and materials contract without a cap, each contract line is configured with a billing type of time and materials with maximum set to no maximum. This is where rate tables are also assigned. Once again, these rate tables provide the labor rates by trade or category and markup percentages on other cost types that may be entered through accounts payable, purchasing, credit cards, employee expense reports, and even via the general ledger. You could define separate rate tables for each contract, but the best practice is to utilize fewer centralized rate tables and assign them to multiple contracts. This is because you can define rules within a single rate table that are specific to dimension values such as cost type, cost code, project, and location. Of course, project cost transactions entered through each cycle provide the source for each cycle's T&M billing. Each transaction in Sage Intacct Construction contains one or more entries that determine the project, the cost code, the cost type, along with other dimension values. Additionally, each entry's billable checkbox determines whether these costs will automatically become available for invoicing. Now, here's another best practice. We recommend configuring projects to default that billable checkbox so that users are less likely to miss a billable expense. You'll want to review all the project-related cost transactions either before or during the invoicing process. Transactions can then be modified to correct errors or remove them from the billing during that pre-invoice review. So now let's take a short product tour of Sage Intacct Construction's project contract and billing processes using a short video that I recorded earlier. We'll begin from a list of T&M contracts, which is simply a filtered list. And the first thing that I'll do is I'll select the top row there to enter into the contract. I'll note that the contract header displays key information like the linked project and customer, whether to include the contract in the WIP schedule, and several other items we might wish to include on the invoice. Looking at one of the contract lines and scrolling down a little bit, we can see that it's been set up with a billing type of time and materials and a maximum billing set to no maximum. It's also been configured to summarize all of the transactions on a single row for that particular contract line. And the rate tables have been assigned here to each contract line. And clicking into one of those, we can view a list of all of the various trades that will be used on this project and their relevant labor rates. Down below, for each subledger, we see markup percentages that have been assigned to particular cost types. So that's the project contract. Now let's navigate over to the projects menu. And I'll open the Generate Invoices user interface. This is where invoicing is done. I can choose to invoice by project or project contract. We'll choose the latter there. And I can change an invoice template to one that I've specifically set up for T&M. I'll set my transaction dates and my bill through cutoff date. I'll select a project contract that I wish to bill. And I'll set to save the document as draft as opposed to posted. When I click preview, I'll be given an option to do a review, but also need to enter some information for the invoice itself, such as the billing application number. It's going to be numeric or text. And note that the previous cycle's billing number will be displayed above. Scrolling on down, the system has located multiple transactions that were entered during this billing cycle that I can now review by clicking into View Source. Here we have a timesheet for our superintendent on the job. I can see the project cost code, cost type, etc. coding that's been entered. The next thing I need to do is to map this transaction to a specific contract line. So I'll complete that process. And then I'll scroll down to look at some of the transactions from other subledgers, like accounts payable, where I see I've got an AP bill that's been entered here. And note that I can click into any attachment on this bill to review it as to decide whether to bill it and how to code it on the invoice. I'll continue that process, including for purchasing transactions for materials. And I can tell it's materials basically by looking at the cost type ID. And a subcontractor invoice as well. Scrolling back up, I can now update the totals at the top. And I'm given a total for the period, which will represent my invoice prior to any retainage. On this invoice, this contract has been set up for no retainage because it's an emergency repair. And so my net invoice amount will be the same. And when I'm ready, I can click up at the top on Create Invoice. I'm rewarded with a confirmation that the invoice has been successfully created. So now I'm going to navigate back to my projects menu and look at some of the options I have there. I can print or email one or more invoices that have been generated, or I can view a list of invoices. With the most current invoice listed at the top. And note that the state of this invoice is draft, which means it hasn't yet been posted. I could opt to send out a draft copy of the invoice to my owner or customer at this point in time. If I wish to do so, I could use that link there that says print or email. Instead, I'm going to edit the invoice so we can take a look at the contents and how that's structured. At the top, I have key information like the date, the due date, the total, any retainage amounts, etc., net less any retainage, and of course the status. Below a little bit, I can see the billing application number that we entered during invoicing and the bill through date that I could have appear on my invoice form. And then the entries, which provide mirroring the schedule of work that's in my contract setup. On the source and attachments view here, I have seen, this is where it's really powerful. The system has pulled together from the transactions that were billed, all of the attachments together that provide the supporting documentation that the customer requires. Now I can simply use the printer email function from this view, which brings up the printer email page, bringing in the customer's default email address, which I'll override. Scrolling down a bit, we'll see that an email template has been defaulted in that I've set up for this purpose. It contains some structure. When I click OK, the system will send the invoice off via email, and it'll track it so you'll be able to tell whether that email has been opened yet or not. Here's a view of a possible email. Yours, of course, will be different in terms of the language that it has and that sort of thing, the layout. It'll be modified by our teams to meet your specific needs. But the important thing that I want to point out is the fact that the invoice and a zip file containing all of those attachments that we just saw have already been attached. And that's really powerful because it has saved an enormous amount of time of keeping track of those supporting documents, and then at the right time pulling them together for me and attaching them to the invoice transmittal. So now let's take another quick timeout for a poll question. In a standard time and materials contract without a GMP clause, what's the default billing limit? Please review the options, make a selection. Remember, you don't have to get the correct response for CPE credit. I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. And of course, the correct response is no maximum because a T&M contract without GMP is open-ended. Now let's add one more layer, a cap. That changes T&M from a reimbursement model into a margin management model. A GMP contract is a hybrid. You bill for time and materials, but there's a ceiling to the total amount billed to the customer. If costs exceed the GMP, the contractor absorbs the overrun. Unless, of course, this is caused by owner's billable changes. As an example, the contract might stipulate, we'll bill you for actual cost plus markup, but we'll guarantee it won't exceed 1.5 million. GMP contracts are growing in popularity and currently make up about 20 to 25% of all construction contracts in the US. The reasons are that primarily they provide owners with a greater level of cost certainty that's important when obtaining financing. It also pushes contractors to manage the schedule, buyout, and contingency aggressively, creating incentives for efficiency. On the other hand, the cap on cost encourages owners to move forward with projects they might otherwise delay. GMP contracts, while similar to standard T&M, tend to be a bit more complicated. First, a more detailed schedule of work that includes elements that are similar to fixed fee contracts are usually specified, and each element stipulates a guaranteed maximum price. So the total GMP value of the schedule of work constitutes the GMP of the contract as a whole. One of these elements is often a contingency allowance, which is a common way to cushion the impact of unknowns, such as uncertain soil conditions. These contingency buffers often mean the difference between a profitable and an unprofitable contract. Also, GMP contracts may include allowances that provide budget for owner decisions not yet made at the time of the agreement. In today's economy, we're also seeing increasing use of escalation clauses to deal with cost inflation. When you add an escalation clause to a GMP contract, you're really redefining how risk for material inflation is shared. So the language needs to be extremely clear and objective. Here are a few recommendations for contractors. First, set a baseline price for each covered material or item so that everyone knows what normal is. Decide if the clause is materials only or also addresses other items such as fuel, freight, or key equipment components. Next, define when the escalation kicks in, which typically entails defining a threshold, so you're not just adjusting for minor fluctuations. And specify whether the trigger is per material item or calculated on an overall basis. And clearly define who pays what cost when the price increases are shared between the customer and the contractor. Finally, state explicitly that approved escalation adjustments increase GMP as opposed to coming out of contingency, so you don't have to squabble over double counting. Now let's discuss how GMP contracts are set up differently from standard T&M and Sage Intacct construction. Recall that contract lines define the billing presentation and determine the schedule of work for a T&M contract. With GMP contracts, these records also determine the maximum amount or cap on billings for each contract line. The total revised price is represented in the highlighted column, reflect the effective GMP value for each contract line. Setting up a GMP contract in Sage Intacct construction is similar to a standard T&M contract. The primary difference is that the maximum billing field for each contracted line is set to either specified amount or total revised price. The system uses the maximum billing setting to determine whether to enforce the GMP during invoicing.
Hi, Chris. I have a quick question. Which setting do you recommend for maximum billing, specified amount, or total revised price?
Thanks for that question. We recommend using total revised price so that approved change orders automatically adjust the cap. Is it possible to manually adjust the cap? Yes, but why not let the automation handle the task? There's some challenges and pitfalls for the contractor when managing GMP contracts. The primary challenge with GMP is not dissimilar to fixed fee contracts, and that is preserving margin. Challenges to margin come in a variety of ways. First, the contractor's costs are no longer protected when the cap is reached, so it becomes essential to manage cost effectively with buyout using purchasing controls or subcontracted bidding processes, etc. Next, the impact of owner change orders may not be accounted for before invoicing, and this sometimes necessitates additional or re-invoicing later, which has a cash flow impact. For many contractors, the lack of visibility into cost incurred to date versus the GMP also creates a lack of urgency until it's too late. Now let's talk about change management for a bit and its impact on margin. Sage Intacct Construction's change order workflow helps preserve margin on GMP jobs by keeping GMP and revenue aligned with scope changes. Approved change orders automatically update the revised contract amount and the corresponding project budget, so scope increases the ceiling instead of coming out of contingency or profit. It also separates known changes from overruns. When you use project change orders for every scope change, Intacct can distinguish cost changes due to scope and versus true overruns with unchanged scope. And that visibility lets you protect fee and contingency instead of silently absorbing owner-driven changes. It also enforces approval before incurring cost or billing impact. Change order approval that begins with change request and then provides status tracking such as draft pending, approved, not approved, etc. And having one or more approvers can stop the field from unilaterally just doing the work and hopefully billing for it later. And it drives accurate WIP and margin reporting. Only approved change orders with a status change roll into revised budgets and contract amounts that feed WIP and margin analytics, keeping profit fade visible in real time. Sage Intacct Construction also provides visibility into pending unapproved change orders and change order requests. At a glance, the user can see the status of an unapproved change order, whether it's been submitted to a customer, and whether the customer has provided notice to proceed, even when the paperwork has not yet been received. It's also important to have awareness of change requests in progress to know what will soon appear as a change order as the workflow progresses. And this visibility elevates the importance of using Sage Intacct Construction's change management workflow. Now, here are some best practices to provide real-time visibility into the state of your GMP contracts. First, tie the GMP value of your contract lines to a project budget to allow for budget to actual reporting. And we've seen that Sage Intacct Construction allows the user to do this with a mouse click during contract setup. Secondly, post all project costs and commitments as soon as possible to provide real-time visibility. If entering costs through an integrated construction management system, such as Procore or Sage Intacct, Sage Construction Management, ensure that these costs are synchronized on at least a daily basis. Thirdly, set up a shared GMP project dashboard and include one or more reports that show for each project total GMP value, approved revisions, billings and cost to date, and a calculated GMP headroom value. So here's an example of a simple report that can be added to your dashboard and reviewed daily. It displays the revised GMP and billings to date and the remaining GMP headroom to hopefully stave off an unexpected shortfall. Sage Intacct's real-time reporting and dashboarding tools are ideal for the task. As you can see, many of the common headaches with GMP are addressed by Sage Intacct Construction.
Hi, Chris. Returning to the favor, can you recap the best practices for managing time and materials contracts that you just discussed?
I sure can. Here's a quick recap of time and materials best practices. First, utilize Sage Intacct Construction's document attachment feature to make certain that required documentation is accessible to the system, and then utilize its billing automation to compile supporting docs when sending customer invoices. Next, take advantage of Sage Intacct Construction's contract configuration automation features to manage revised GMP via the change order workflow. And finally, monitor both cost and billings versus GMP in real time to head off potential GMP headroom issues. Okay, time for another poll question. It's our fourth and final. We're asking in a GMP contract who typically carries the financial risk when actual project costs exceed the agreed upon cap. Remember that we just need your response for you to receive CPE credit. We'll take another 15 seconds or so for you to answer. Is it the project owner, the architect, the contractor, or the bonding company? Well, you likely well know this one. Unfortunately, the answer here is the contractor. So today, you've seen how real-time visibility into cost and contract performance helps teams better manage project control and margin. In addition, Sage Intacct Construction accelerates the billing cycle with features such as transaction attachments to support customer-required documentation. It also has advanced contract capabilities that control and automate billing, and a change order workflow system that manages contract price and budget revisions. We hope that we've given you a glimpse of how Sage Intacct Construction can greatly improve your billing process and your cash flow. Now I'll ask Brian Terrell to tell us about some important information about upcoming events that you won't want to miss.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Lavender. Great presentation. I know that we're got a question or so that have been posed here. Are you guys going to be able to hang around and answer those questions?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Okay. While we wait even another minute or two for last minute questions, let me do a bit of advertising here. We are constantly out and about speaking to business groups like Texas State Society, Texas State Society for CPA, local chapter, CFMA local chapters. And we have 3 presentations that are ready to go. I want to just make these available to you and make you aware of these. This first one is a contrarian position on what we continue to hear through the popular media, that artificial intelligence is going to have a negative impact on employment in the back office. I do not believe that, and have prepared that first presentation entitled "Why AI Creates More Accountants, Not Fewer," specifically to rebut that. And if you're would like for us to come into your office or come into your business group, or and make this presentation and provide that contrarian position, just let us know. A second that was very popular in 2025 is entitled "Accelerating the Financial Close: Automation Today, AI Tomorrow." And then a third, "Changing Technology: Creative Disruption in the Accounting Profession, Thriving in a Blockchain Economy," taps into the recent popularity or notoriety that stable coins have gained in the financial media. That particular presentation was a favorite at the Houston and San Antonio Texas Society CPE expos held in those cities in November and December. All right. Later this month, we'll have a webinar entitled "AI-Powered Construction Finance: New AI Features and Latest Releases from Sage Future." We'll be in San Francisco next week learning the latest and greatest about this, and we want to share it with you. On Wednesday, May 20th, you can use your handheld mobile device to take a snapshot of that QR code and pre-register for that and get that on your calendar. And then we'll be at the Dallas Build Expo, I guess yesterday or today, tomorrow in booth 577. If you're headed out there, look us up. The Legible team would like to shake your hand and probably give you something, a gift for stopping by. And then if you're going to perhaps be traveling to the CFMA annual conference and exhibition in Phoenix on May 30th through June 3rd, we'll also be out there and would love for you to stop by and say hello. Okay, here's a couple of quick questions. We have 5 minutes. And this question: in Sage Intacct Construction, retainage is automatically calculated, but what if it needs to be overridden? Can it be overridden at the transaction level, and how does it support retainage release? I don't know if that's a question for Lavender or a question for Chris, but you guys address that if you will.
Yeah, I think Lavender, you take this one.
Yes. So thank you, Brent. I think in Sage Intacct Construction, retainage is automatically calculated when the contract line is marked as billable, and this helps to keep the billing consistent. And if needed, user can override the retainage amount at the billing level. And this is usually controlled through the permissions or approvals to avoid errors or misuse. And when it comes to the releasing retainage, the system allows you to do this through a separate billing step by creating the retainage invoice. Then the amount can be moved from the retainage receivable into the regular account payable so it can be controlled and collected.
Very good. Thank you, Lavender. Here's another. Do all change orders impact guaranteed maximum price?
I'll take that one. So Sage Intacct Construction does allow users to create different types of change orders. I'll mention that first for different purposes. But only approved change orders that are linked to GMP contracts and that include a price value will impact that revised maximum billing, assuming that it's been the contract lines have been configured properly to utilize revised maximum billing amount. So cost-only change orders would not have an impact on it.
Okay, great, Chris. Thank you for that. I know that you mentioned WIP visibility. The Sage Intacct, or how does Sage Intacct incorporate the WIP schedule to ensure that overbilling and underbilling situations are minimized and aligned with revenue?
Yeah, I think I will take this one. So I think that's a great point to build on. And the primary benefit of this WIP schedule is the automation of construction work in progress calculations and to create some monthly over or under billing journal entries in a way that can foster the coordination between the project managers and the financial leadership. So the system suggests a project completion percentage based on the cost to budget, but also accept the input from both project managers and the CFOs to determine the under or over calculation. And it also can provide an accurate period-specific view of the job profitability or the contract revenue, cost to date, and the projection of the cost to complete. So for this reason, it's also an extremely useful source of the information for owners, executives, or the bonding agencies. They can utilize the WIP schedule to monitor the overall company backlog health and margin trends, and also the cash impacts from these over or under billings.
Okay, good, Lavender. Well, we have one more minute. I guess one more quick question I can squeeze in there. Does Sage Intacct Construction integrate costs for those using Procore for field operations to, extend that ability to track time and materials and guaranteed maximum price project costs?
Well, the answer is definitely yes. Procore developed a really deep bidirectional integration with Sage Intacct Construction via Sage Intacct's open API. Projects and project contracts, however, are typically originated in Sage Intacct Construction with Procore, and those direct costs that are entered by the accounting team in the ERP can then be synchronized back to Procore as well. In short, a controller can absolutely track time and materials and GMP project costs with a combination of Intacct Construction and Procore.
Okay, good. Well, it's time, the top of the hour. Thank you, Lavender and Chris, and thank you for sharing there at the very end that if you use Procore, we've got you covered with Sage Intacct Construction. I want to also tell or express my appreciation to Sophia and your team, Sophia, for these gorgeous slides. They really make us look good. And so we look forward, hopefully, to see you next week or next month after we return from Sage Future for the latest and greatest on AI features in Sage Intacct Construction. Until then, have a great week.